Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, First Steps to Getting Published. Today we're joined by four of our fantastic Taylor and Francis colleagues. Firstly, we have Laura Hussey, who is editor for Theatre and Performance Studies. We also have Elliot Mills joining us, who is a portfolio manager for economics and finance journals.
We then have James Watson, our Open Access Books lead, and then finally Samuel Ward, our Open Access Portfolio Manager here at Taylor and Francis. Our four panellists will be answering and discussing 4 questions, focusing on the publishing process, tips and tricks to getting published, things to consider before approaching a journal or publisher, common mistakes, and also the biggest challenges when publishing.
We hope you enjoy our webinar. We'll now hand it over to our editors to discuss the first question, which I feel like is a good place to get started. And that question is, what is the academic publishing process?
For books, your first step is submitting a book proposal. So the book proposal template guides can be found on the Routledge website, and what I'd recommend is reaching out to a commissioning editor individually, as they may have list specific proposal guidelines and also just like specific advice that they can give you about your work. So for example, if you're interested in publishing a theatre and performance book, the first thing I'd recommend is emailing a little more information about your work, and we can go from there. So once you've submitted your book proposal and a sample chapter or writing sample, it will be assessed internally by your commissioning editor first. So in the case of Theatre and Performance Studies, I take a look at it and see whether the work is a good fit for our list and whether or not the proposal needs any more edits before we look at next steps. This process is usually short, it's about a week or two to do this, and then from there we will prepare your book for external peer review. So the peer review process can vary in terms of length, but at Routledge, we've made a lot of efforts and worked very hard to make sure that our processes are very smooth. So for my list, a book proposal can usually take anywhere from about 2 to 3 months in peer review. After the peer review process, you and your editor would discuss the feedback, and it's very much just a conversation to help strengthen the book. So yeah, so usually this is a very exciting part of the process. And following on from that point, if we're kind of both happy with the feedback and next steps, we would propose the book proposal to your editorial board and get approval to offer you a contract. In terms of timelines, you'd supply your deadline date. I think that can be a bit of a misconception, that I would tell you when the book is due, but it's it's very much that's coming from you. So, and you'll work with your commissioning editor along with an editorial assistant who'll be able to kind of support you then towards that deadline.
And then following on from Laura, for open access books or chapters, they follow exactly the same process and workflows as the rest of our book titles, including the same commissioning, the same peer review and production processes. When you submit the book proposal, you can flag up to your commissioning editor your interest in publishing the book open access. Publishing open access means that anyone, anywhere can access, download and share your research for free. The main difference is that there's normally a book publishing charge or BPC to publish it open access, which is normally payable before the final manuscript goes into production. The BPC supports the many costs associated with publishing a book, including editorial services, peer review, copy editing, typesetting, ebook conversion and dissemination, as well as ongoing marketing, sales and editorial support. Many research funders, such as UKRI, now recommend or even mandate that research they have funded is published open access. Therefore, it's important to check what open access requirements your research funder has and what funding options there may be available. Your university research office should also be able to help you with these conversations.
So I guess we can move on to the process for submitting to a journal now. So I guess the first step really is just to write your paper. That can take as long as you need it to take. Really the start of the process here at TNF is you find your journal next. There's lots of tools available for this. The best place to start, I would say, is the journal finder tool that's available on our author services pages. If you are unsure about which journal you'd like to I do know that some authors have a preference for a journal. You know, if there's a top, say in this case, an economics journal here that you have in mind, then you can just go straight to the journal. But if you're struggling, we do have a tool that's available for you to use to help you find a journal. The next step is to submit to the journal via online peer review platform, ensuring that you answer all of the relevant questions, providing your paper in the format required of the journal. You can find more information about what these requirements are on the information for authors pages on each journal homepage. Once you've filled out the questionnaire and provided your manuscript files and all of that stuff, your paper will then go through peer review, where 2 independent external peer reviewers will be invited to review your paper. At this point, you might have a revised decision where your paper will be sent back to you by the editor. They'll have some comments from those reviewers. The editor will provide comments also, and you can revise your paper and just rewrite it and then go through steps. Go through the same steps that you followed before, so submitting and filling out all the questions, files, etc. Once your paper's gone through peer review and you get the good acceptance decision, your article's then exported to our production team, where it's typeset and copy edited so that the article fits in with the style of the journal, and so your article will appear at its best in both the online and print copies, if the journal does print copies of that issue. You'll need to sign a publishing agreement, and then your article's live on Taylor and Francis Online. At this point, it may or may not be assigned to an issue, depending on a few factors. So, is the journal OA? Are you publishing OA if it's not? And also, crucially, if there's issues available left in the volume to assign your article to, because sometimes your article will be published online before it's assigned to an issue. But then once that's done, that's the publishing process complete. I'll pass on to my colleague Sam, who can sort of elaborate more on sort of the open access publishing to a journal and what that's like.
Thanks, Elliot. So very similar as before. The publishing process for an OA paper is very similar to what you'd find in a subscription or a hybrid journal, as Elliot has already alluded to. You'd find your journal, you'd submit your paper to said journal, upon which you'll look to receive the peer reviews. Depending on the result of the reviews, you may need to revise and resubmit. Your work can be accepted with minor revisions. It can be suggested for major revisions. Number of processes that could happen on receiving your article. You will need to pay an article processing charge, which we shorten for an APC here, unless your institution has an OA membership or an OA agreement with TNF. As mentioned before, on the OA book side, check with your institute. The academic officer will be able to help you decipher whether it does or not. Discounts and waivers can also apply depending on which country you submit from. There are a list of countries that have waivers in place for them. If you go on the World Bank denomination of countries, you'll have a list there for low income countries and low middle income countries that have discounts applied. So please do look into that as well. And you can view that information on our author services webpage. But yeah, apart from that, the process is very similar to what Elliot has just described. And I think the main thing to consider here is the sort of finding the journal, ensuring you have the money to publish open access, whether that's through institution or through your own and co-author collaboration, and then looking to get in the paper in the journal and going through the peer review process.
What is the one tip you'd give a graduate student who wants to publish?
So I'd say just don't be afraid to reach out to your commissioning editor. So we want to hear from you. I love speaking with early career researchers, and I personally feel very strongly that doing things, like this webinar are so important in terms of demystifying the process. If you're writing a book for the first time, it's understandable that it's all new to you. You're not expected to know everything. So if you're unsure about something, any aspect of the process, just email us to ask, So I have a conversations with people, you know, at all stages of their PhD or postgraduate work. And even just, this is more like just a small tip, but like, let's say you're stuck on who to contact and you're thinking, okay, like there's 3 editors for theatre performance studies. So what you can do is, most websites, and especially with the Routledge website, you'll see a section called editorial contacts. So underneath that, you've got everyone's name, title, and what list or subject area they work on. And it normally will have a little bio, which will include like the different subjects within that, or the different types of books they work on. But let's say you've taken a look at that and you're still a little unsure, you can just email one of us, you know, as in, it happens all the time. If you get the wrong person, the absolute worst thing will happen is that they will forward it to the right editor, you know. So it's absolutely fine, it happens all the time. And, you know, if you reach out, it will reach the right person, you know, eventually. So I think just reach out at any point, even if you're in the early stages of an idea. You know, we're really excited to hear about new research, and we're very invested in the field. So, you know, it's lovely to chat to people at all stages of their work. So yeah, just pop us an email, please, would be my tip.
And exactly the same as Laura. So if you want to publish your research in the form of an open access book, please flag this up to your commissioning editor, as they can help you, including guidance around the different options available, including full book and individual chapter open access, and help around funding options. Open access options can seem complex, so don't be afraid to seek help from your commissioning editor or editor or assistant contact. For example, we can also convert a previously published book or individual chapter to open access. So it's worth getting in touch with your commissioning editor at any stage to discuss open access options. Also, don't feel that your book has to be completely unique or have no competition. In actual fact, that can put off a commissioning editor, as it might indicate that there isn't a market for the book, or it's not an area suitable for a full book. Often it's a good sign that there are other books published in that area, especially other recently published ones, as it means that it's an active research area, which should have a receptive audience.
So one tip I'd give postgraduate students who want to publish, for me, I'd want you to make sure that you're reading the information for authors, as it contains all the information you'll need for things like submission fees or open access fees if they're applicable, format requirements, the peer review policy. It tends to have some contact details in there if you need those. So yeah, it's just a really, really good place to start. And if I know that it's one tip, but kind of in line with that, if you've got a question, head over to the author services to find information on sort of every single step of the publishing process. You know, there's guides on there, there's FAQs, there's videos, and there's loads of contact information on there for every single step of the publishing process. So yeah, they're the kind of the tips that I'd give a postgraduate student looking to publish first.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with Elliot there. Short of going on the author services page and looking at all the helpful media that we have there for postgraduate students who want to publish, I would also ensure, you know, think of a fully open access journal, ensuring that you have the funds to publish there. Or, as I said previously, that you are covered by your institution, you know, to ensure that you can publish. And I think one really important consideration is where you're going to put where you want to put your article. Like, you'll have the article, you'll have it there, have a list of journals that you think are acceptable for you to publishing. And I would really suggest to go for high readership and high downloads over necessarily an impact factor. You know, a lot of institutions can get bogged down in impact factors, but I think as an early career researcher, I think it's very important to have your article somewhere that people can reach and read, rather than somewhere that has that sort of elite status of a high impact factor. So just bearing those couple of points in mind when you go to publish.
Great, thank you so much for discussing those tips. Our next question is, what are the essential things to consider before approaching a journal or publisher?
So I'd say the main thing is just really finding the right fit for you. So just do your research. I mean, what's great is that, you know, you can take a look at any press's research, especially Routledge, and take a look at all our front list and back list, like all the projects that we've published. So take a look and see, you know, have a think about what presses are leading in your area in terms of publishing great work. So as I said, like, take a look at their website, take a look at some of the projects they've published recently. For example, if you're looking to publish a book on like intimacy direction, you know, you'll take a look at the various publishers and see what presses and editors are showing investment in that area. So how your work could then be in conversation with them and alongside theirs, you know, says a lot. And it's not to say, you know, that you can't reach out to a press if you haven't seen anything like that on their back catalogue, or, you know, something that they published recently, because of course we also have projects that are under contract. So that's why, again, it's great to reach out to your commissioning editor, because, for example, you might take a look and see, oh, well, they haven't published much in X, but there could be, you know, 4 projects that are just under contract, so they won't yet show up on the website. So it's always great to just reach out and kind of have a think about that. Yeah, so I'd say really explore each publisher's work, taking a look at their series, and just see what program excites you, and even take a look at your own work, like who are you citing again and again. That's a great place to start.
And then in regards to open access books specifically, if your research funder is wanting you to publish your book open access, it's important to understand what requirements they have, as each research funder is different. These will include which Creative Commons licenses they allow, whether the book needs to publish immediately open access or if an embargo period is allowed, what the application process is for applying for open access funding, and any funder acknowledgements which should be included in the book. They might also have more technical requirements around which formats the ebook needs to publish in, or which platforms it needs to be hosted on. Again, your commissioning editor will be able to help you with answering these questions, so you can ensure that the book is published in compliance with your research funder's requirements. It's also worth checking if you also have a librarian contact or research office at your university you can speak to help guide you through the requirements of your funder's grant agreement, and any open access requirements they have as well.
So for journals, some of the essential things to consider, you know, before approaching a journal, is sort of asking yourself, what sort of journal do I need? You might, you know, need certain characteristics, such as like an impact factor above X, or, you know, a journal that gets so many citations, sort of on average, to get sort of some postgraduate opportunities, or maybe you're applying for tenure, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's really useful to sort of think about what kind of journal do you need to sort of meet those requirements. I'm sure Sam will touch upon this, but you need to ask yourself if you've got funding, if you want to publish OA, and are there any sales deals that your institution might have with the publisher to sort of fund that open access publishing. The next thing is asking, you know, does your article contain all the elements that the journal's asking for? Because that's really important for, you know, most editors won't even begin to consider an article if it's, you know, missing those basic requirements that are requested on the information for authors and things like that. So yeah, I think they're sort of the main things to really consider when looking for a journal. But I'll pass on to Sam to say some more about sort of what to look for open access.
Thanks, Elliot. Yeah, I think James, Elliot have touched on it very nicely, you know, the funding. Consider what funding options are there if you are looking for funding, if you're not funding the article yourself. You know, there are a number of deals in place across Europe. You have like JISC and BIBSAM, and, you know, in the US, the movement for the OSTP memo for funding. So just consider what funding is there if you're not funding the article yourself. And then, you know, start to think, and Elliot mentioned it earlier, you know, check the IFA page, the information for author page, on the journal's homepage. You know, ensure that the article that you want to submit actually fits the scope of that journal, and that it's formatted in a way that editors see fit. You know, a lot of editors will put on the journal homepage somewhere how they like the articles to be formatted that come into the journal. So please do check that. You know, it's rather important. Be prepared for rejection. You have to be prepared for rejection. Have more than one journal in mind, you know, when you're considering where you want to publish your article. You know, the whole cascade idea, aim for the summit, but be prepared to fall into another journal that you find acceptable. Elliot's already mentioned it. You know, the funders may have certain journals that they would like you to publish in, so have that in mind, but then also have in mind where the article can publish, because it isn't always necessarily your first choice where it ends up. So just be prepared, I would say, with a good few backups, and be prepared to sort of not fail, but just not reach your first article reach the pinnacle journal. Be prepared to publish elsewhere.
Thanks, everyone. What are the most common publishing mistakes postgraduate students make?
So I think the main thing really is just to understand that, you know, a PhD thesis in its form is not a suitable format to be a published book, and it can take some time to kind of adapt and work on converting that content. So like in particular, your book proposal and possible sample chapters will go out for peer review, so you may be asked to make changes to that original content. And even just a tip as well is that when you are submitting a book proposal, when we ask for a sample chapter, I would expect that sample chapter to be, you know, to reflect the quality and the writing style and everything that your book will have, your future book. So it wouldn't really be appropriate to have, let's say, a chapter of your thesis, because, you know, it's so different. Even thinking about different features, like methodology sections or literature reviews, that would need to be adapted or kind of stripped out for a final book. So I would say, you know, the kind of most common publishing mistake, that would be kind of just not being open to that process. So just being kind of open to that process of exploring kind of how to strengthen your work, and how your thesis research can become a book. And, you know, that's not to say, and I want to clarify that, you know, there's some incredible research coming out of PhDs, and I think it's the strength and potential of the work that is so important, and that's what counts. So it's not to say that, you know, your research needs to be completely ripped up and started from scratch, but it's just looking at like how your work is communicated, because that is change. You know, we're going from you writing for your supervisor and a small group of people to writing for a wider readership, and like how you'll keep those readers engaged is what's important. And, you know, take a look at some of the books you love and kind of see what inspiration kind of jumps out at you from that. Yeah, tip.
Thanks, Laura. And then in terms of common myths around open access books, some mistakenly believe that open access means anyone can use your research however they like. However, this isn't the case. An open access book is published under one of a set number of Creative Commons licenses, which outline what others can and cannot do with your work. In all cases, others must acknowledge you as the original author. The Creative Commons license CC BY NC ND, which is a non-commercial, non-derivative license, means that others are free to access, download and share your book. However, they cannot adapt or change the content or use it commercially without prior permission. This license type is often particularly of interest to book authors within the humanities and social sciences. On the other hand, the most open CC BY license allows reusers to adapt, remix or build upon your book, even for commercial use, so long as they acknowledge you as the original author. So it's important to understand which Creative Commons license is best for your needs.
I think from a journal perspective, a thing that we find a lot of early career researchers and postgraduate students sort of making is only having one journal in mind for their research. Journals, especially really, really impactful ones, tend to have really low acceptance rates also. So whilst you can amend your paper and submit it to the same journal again, having a list of suitable publishing alternatives is often a much better strategy. And then the second one, it kind of just touches upon a lot of what I've already spoken about on this webinar, which is not reading the IFAs, the information's for authors, and having the paper sent straight back to you to sort of make those changes, or flat out rejected because it's not been formatted correctly, and the editors, some of these editors just don't have the time. So yeah, just making sure that you read the information for authors, making sure that you've got all the elements that the journal's asked for.
Perfect. Yeah, and just following on from that, I would say the most common mistake that I see on a quite regular basis is, early career researchers or postgraduate students providing their manuscripts in a format that doesn't suit the journal they've submitted it to, and it's just completely outside of the scope of the journal that they've submitted to. I would definitely say that is the most common mistake I see.
Great, thank you for discussing that. The next question we've got, and our final question, is what are the biggest challenges when publishing?
So I would say in book publishing, it's time and communication are the biggest challenges. I think having a relationship with your editor where you can be honest, ask for support and feel comfortable communicating is really important. For example, if you feel like the deadline that you committed to when you signed the contract no longer works, it's really important to reach out to your editor as soon as possible to let them know, kind of for two reasons, really. I mean, as a commissioning editor, I want the best for your work, and any project I commission, it's really important that the potential of that work is fulfilled, so that we can, continue to publish the quality of work that we want and the, wonderful standard of work that we have. And also, it doesn't serve us or you to submit work that you've been rushed to do because you were working to a deadline that no longer worked for you for like a number of reasons. So letting us know for that reason, and then also so that we can make sure that the schedules that we have and the internal deadlines that we have can be amended in time. It's really important to let us know. And similarly, just like that, we're here to help. So I'd ask you to communicate, how we can help you. Like, for example, on my list, some authors love having chapter deadlines, and it gives them structure and it helps them keep to their deadlines. Other people, it makes them feel like they're still in school. They hate having chapter deadlines. They just want to submit the whole draft manuscript in one. So it really depends. There's no right or wrong. I think the main takeaway here is just that we're here to help. So feeling comfortable communicating that. So whatever challenges you're having, whether it's timing or anything like that, that we can, work on them together.
And as mentioned, publishing a book open access follows the same editorial and production workflows as any other book. Therefore, the same challenges for publishing a book equally apply for an open access book. In particular, I would say that book publishing is definitely a marathon and not a sprint. It normally takes a good number of years from creating the initial proposal through to writing and finally publishing a book. Therefore, it's important to set out realistic timeframes for writing and delivering the final manuscript. As Laura said, our editorial teams are here to help guide you throughout the whole process, including answering any specific questions if you're interested in publishing open access. Probably the main open access specific challenge is in regards to ensuring you understand and ultimately comply with your research funders' requirements. As mentioned, both your commissioning editor on the publisher's side and your own library or research office at your university will be able to help you with this and ensure that your book is published in compliance with your research funders' requirements.
So in journals publishing, I'd say the biggest challenge when publishing is to do with the editors. Editors have more and more papers to process than ever before. They've got less time to spend on those papers. And it is becoming the norm for editors to reject and not provide comments, just due to the time constraints on that, before the paper's even gone out to review. So a lot of authors don't really understand why their paper was rejected. It's a real challenge, and we at TNF understand how much of a challenge that is. Papers being rejected and you really don't know why. But we've got a lot of options to support you. We've got language editing, if it could have been that. We've got transfers. So if your article was rejected from a journal and they didn't say why, we do offer you other suitable avenues for your research. There's a lot more options that you can sort of find for yourself on the author services pages that we have available. But yeah, I'd say that's the biggest challenge when publishing.
Yeah. And then moving on from that, there are thousands of journals to publish fully open access work in. The number increases year on year. Even here at TNF, we launch a certain amount of fully OA journals every year, and we won't be the only publisher to do so. It's a real challenge deciphering, which journal is suitable and will enhance your career and your networks. It's not just about the impact factor, as I said earlier. It's also about discoverability, readership and social presence. There are so many choices, and it is difficult to decide where is best to publish your work. I think my advice there would be choose a reputable publisher, like Taylor and Francis, and have 3 or more journals in mind that article can publish in. As I said earlier, start at the elite, have a middle journal, and have an acceptable journal. Have 3 levels of threshold that you think your article can go into. Every early career researcher starts somewhere, and so just have that in mind. I think a really good suggestion as well is to get yourself onto an editorial board of a fully OA journal. If you're looking to publish OA, your passions lie in open access research, then please do consider joining a board. Start off in a junior capacity, whether it's as a reviewer, just ed board member, associate editor, somewhere where you can get on, begin learning about the academic process, the publishing process through the lens of an editor, and that will only improve your academic writing. As you become more aware of what certain journals look for in submissions, then you'll become more aware of how to write in an acceptable way for open access journals to publish your work.
Thanks, everyone. We've now reached the end of our webinar, First Steps to Getting Published. Just want to say a massive thank you to our 4 colleagues for presenting this fantastic webinar on how to get published.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We hope you have picked up some useful advice to use on your publishing journey. And if you have any feedback or ideas for future webinars, please do email our marketing team at hire.education@taylorandfrancis.com. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to our webinar, and thank you to our presenters as well.